There is no such thing as beer for women. That's the simple fact. There is no such thing. If we wanted to normalize women drinking beer, we should just do that, normalize it. Make sure that women drink beer in peace by letting them choose whatever beer they want and letting them drink it in peace. If there are cultural stigmas attached in various countries, then there are other things that need to be done. But making a beer for women further divides a beer into his and hers. Remember there was a time even in Ireland that a woman couldn't get a beer in a pint glass. And apparently it's still done. By putting beer for women onto a bottle or onto a can, it means that not everything else is for women.
They surveyed them, and of the 500 beer labels, 35 of the beer labels portrayed people. And of the 35 labels, 21 referenced women, 13 referenced men, and 1 referenced both. And the study showed that where women were referenced, they were sexualized, whereas men aren't. And they have such lovely names as a happy ending, or a pearl necklace, or there's a blonde beer with a blonde on her knees, and it says "goes down easy." So this study on the tap house with the 500 beer labels, they also, what I found was really, really interesting, is they also surveyed each of the servers. And it was a mix of genders, male and female. And they were like, of the people who buy the beers with the sexualized men on the labels, can you tell me a little bit about them or how you interact with them? And they found that those people wouldn't take, or they didn't like taking advice from women on beer, and they would question whether or not the women knew anything about the beer. Whereas if a male server told them the same thing, they would listen to the male server.
Why objectification is a problem? We're not just sitting here and saying, oh, objectification is bad because we don't like it, which would be a completely reasonable response as well.
True.
But objectification, which dehumanizes women, especially when you see pictures with just boobs or just female body parts. It's really dehumanizing. Sexually objectified images of women have been identified by many scholars as encouraging sexual assault. This is a representation of a much bigger issue.
Yes.
And objectification is dangerous. And not just in beer, but period. It is dangerous.
There's also attitudes. So the EU did a study of male attitudes towards women, and they studied 1,000 men in each country. And though the statistic that I found shocking is that 7% of male respondents in Ireland think that a woman walking alone at night is fair game.
On the one hand, there is a clear link between sexist and misogynistic branding and things like rape, sexual assault, and thinking that women are fair game when they're just walking home. On the other hand, there is also an economic thing to this, as in, if you are using sexist branding and you're thinking, sure, whatever, my target market is men, you are fundamentally excluding at least 50% of your market. And I'm not just saying the market who will be drinking your beer, but who will be buying your beer. How unoriginal must you be to put a red-haired woman on a red ale beer, or a blonde-haired woman on a blonde ale? It's so boring.
And also, the female demographic is the quickest growing demographic in beer. Like the male demographic for beer consumption has remained stagnant, whereas the female demographic is growing. So this is your new market. This is your new target audience, and you don't want to alienate them.
Women don't need pink drinks, or women don't need hibiscus in their beer. They don't need for it to be low calorie or light or whatever the case is. You don't. In the same way that men can choose how many beers to drink, and they can choose whatever they want. Just ask them what they want instead of saying, oh, you're a girl, you'd like pink. Here, have a pink beer. Let's just allow everybody the same choice.
Let's treat people as complex beings with their own agency who like a variety of things, and just, market beer to people who like beer.
Basically, we're here to learn about the Reinheitsgebot, the basic thing when it was brought in. And the first mention I could find was 1516. And It was a law that governed beer brewing, which allowed only barley, so malted barley, water, and hops. Now, if you've been listening along to our series on ingredients, and if you know a little bit about beer, there's a really key ingredient that's missing there, and that is yeast. So the Reinheitsgebot started out trying to fix prices and supply of different ingredients across Bavaria and Germany. So if you think about it, malted barley is the biggest grain that is used in beer making even till this day, but there's many other grains that are used. For instance, wheat and rye. The Reinheitsgebot banned wheat and rye in beer so that there was enough supply for bread makers, because those are very common bread grains.
It's a bread protection law rather than a beer protection law, and that's absolutely correct.
And I think it's interesting, like, because Belgium has such a different beer heritage, I suppose, and it borders part of, I suppose, after Bavaria, it borders currently what we would call Germany. The Rauch beer, I mean, what's consumed in that? Is it just smoky? Is it the same beer and smoke isn't really, or the
malt would have been smoked, so maybe that almost is one of the ways that brewers would have been quite inventive with using only those 3 ingredients or 4, depending on which time period you're talking about. And rather than looking at ingredients, looking at method and the way that you treat your ingredients as a way to differentiate.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just think it's interesting. And they actually have a quote from like a local German guy, and he said, like, a German wants his beer made according to the purity laws. He goes, when I go on vacation, I drink wine. So, like, you know, I just thought that was a fun and interesting quote. And like, even though these things were set 500 years ago, people still want what was made 500 years ago.
But literally, most beer in the world is made from exactly 4 ingredients. You could have so many varieties just with those 4 ingredients that you wouldn't even need to write a law about it.
Between 1871 and 1906 is when the law starts to apply across Germany. So that's really, not necessarily a result of like, we make this good beer, we must protect it, but kind of more about corporations than the companies. So I think that's really, really interesting. But again, people kind of, sort of overlook that in terms of it has to come like, it's national pride. It's like, well, no, they're actually just kind of protecting their individual business. So it's pretty interesting.
So, as you all know, beer is really only made with 4 ingredients, right? So it's malts, it's malted barley or grains, isn't just barley, malt, yeast, hops, and water. And so hops are the thing that people really look at all the time. People don't always ask about your grain bill or your malt bill. They generally ask about your hop schedule. They want to know where your hops are from, what kind of hops, how late did you add them, what are they adding to it? And it's amazing to me because hops are like these tiny little plant things, and they give you all these amazing flavors. Like, what is this sorcery? It's so fun.
The hops that we use are the female flowers of the hop plant, and they're dioecious. So there's one plant will have male kind of sprays of flowers that have pollen, and then in the wind the pollen would float over, hopefully finding a receptive female plant. They have these little green flowers. They're not like hibiscuses or roses or something. They're all green, and they've like these little like catkins, like their little bracts are organized all around in like sort of a spruce cone shape. We've discovered that these cones are the things that we want to harvest because they're volatile oils that they use to like keep down bacteria and stuff. They taste good to us, and even kind of have they're in the Cannabinaceae family, which also has got cannabis in it and also have volatile oils.
Certain regions of the world that are pretty well known for hops. So Germany is one. The US is obviously another. New Zealand and Australia is one. But
yeah, like I've been to Germany 13 times, and every time I fly into the airport, I look for the hop fields as we're driving on the Autobahn, and they're definitely a sexy ingredient, and I'm so obsessed with them that I have a sleeve tattoo on my leg of hops.
That's so cool. But I mean, I guess what's important about hops anyway is that they are a plant, and they're used to bitter beer. So, that's what they're really adding. Those oils that Bean was talking about there, they're really used to give balance to the beer, because if you just have grains and water, what you get is a sweet liquid before the yeast gets there. And what the hops do is they add some sort of bitterness, which is what we all like about beer anyway, isn't it?
So before the discovery of hops in beer, it was known as Groot, which is basically a combination of herbal ingredients. So there might be yarrow or bog myrtle, rosemary, wormwood, lavender, those kinds of things. So the discovery that hops could be added to beer as flavoring was first recorded in written history in the year 822. Then came the realization of hops as a preservative, and this allowed the brewers to make stronger beers and play more with their recipes, and also greatly increased the beer's shelf life, because previously you would have to drink it fresh within a couple of days.
There is this myth that IPAs came from English travelers traveling to India and putting lots more hops in their beer so that it preserved the beer, and therefore it stayed for the long journey. Well, it's kind of not true anyway. Hops are used for two primary things. That's bittering and then aroma. The way that you can control the bitterness of your beer when brewing with hops is by controlling the different ways in which you use it. So how early in the boil you add it will make a really big difference to how bitter the beer is. If you add it really early, it's had a much longer time to be on the heat, and those oils or the resins, get turned into something that tastes bitter in the end, as opposed to a very late addition, which is often used for aroma hops. So the less heat you put in it, the more the volatility of those oils is preserved, and that is the aroma. And that is bitterness and hoppiness are not the same thing. Yeah.
I don't know. I just learned about 5 new things in that sense. So, woohoo. Should hear that on loop about 10 more times.
Thank you, as usual, for joining us at the Beer Ladies podcast. We will see you next week.